We will upload the webinar to our website in the next little while, and you'll be able to listen to it then. Apologies for any of you who've come to hear Ben Tye. I don't have a lovely Mancunian accent or a beard and glasses, but Ben will be along a little later in about 25 minutes time or so to talk to us about a case study. So you will get a chance to see him. He's flown across the Atlantic today, so he wasn't here to be able to get started with us. So let's get going then. I have 14 slides in total for those of you who like to keep track. So you have a sense of how fast we're moving or not. We're keeping an eye on the time and trying to keep it speeding along. Do write notes if you have questions as we go, or if there are technical issues. But thank you very much for joining. In a moment, I'm going to turn off the video camera because I can be quite distracting looking down at my notes and rummaging paper, and we'll just go with the slides for a bit. We'll put the camera back on when Ben joins us, and we'll have a proper interview then. First of all, though, welcome. As you can see, we have a box down in the bottom right-hand side that's marked chat. We're getting messages as we go from people who are checking in and working with some technical stuff, so that's great. Please use that for questions. We might not answer them straight away, but we will nonetheless follow them and pick some of them up at the end, and if we don't get them over the course of the webinar, we'll do some work on them afterwards. This is our fifth webinar Able & How has done in the recent past, in the last 18 months or so. Previous ones you can see listed on the page. You can go and watch them, listen to them, download them from our YouTube page, which should be easy to find. Go to YouTube and type in Able & How. Previous ones have included delivering effective change management, etc., as you can see on the page there. So hopefully that makes sense and that's easy to do. And just as a final setup, we are going to follow a process that looks a bit like this. We'll cover off Able & How and organizational change management quickly for those of you who are new to us or to the concept of OCM or organizational change management. We will talk about Agile. I will not claim, nor will anybody in Able & How, to be an Agile guru. We use Agile, we understand it, we find it very useful, but there are many people in the world who would want to teach the course on Agile, and we're not amongst those. We understand how Agile can help our business, but if anyone is an Agile guru on the call and they want to try and catch us up, they probably can. So we'll look at how Agile connects with organizational change management, which is what we're quite excited about, talk to you about some of those components, and then we'll look at a case study. As I mentioned, my colleague Ben will be in a little while. And finally, we'll leave you with 3 things to take away. So if that makes sense, I'm just going to turn off the webcam here and say goodbye to you for the minute. We'll be back on in a little while, but we'll focus on the slides for now. Right, I'm still here, and I hope you're still there. If we look at Agile and change management, let me go back one. Part of the reason why we're running this webinar is because we're of the view that not enough people, there's not enough information about how Agile connects with change management. If you go on the internet and look for Agile, you can find dozens, if not hundreds, of fantastic little videos that will explain Agile to you. You can find a certain amount of information, not least on our website, about change management and organizational change management. But the overlap of the two is an area in which there's very little discussion. There are articles on our website, which I'll refer you to at the end, but we thought we'd have a chat with you about that for now. So first of all, who are we? What brings us here? Able & How is a management consultancy. We are based in beautiful downtown London in the United Kingdom. However, we operate all over the world. If you've been on our website, or if you've not, I'd urge you to go have a look at our client list. We've worked with some fantastic companies, had tremendous opportunities to do interesting projects. Increasingly recently, a lot of those have been Agile as well as change management projects. And that's where we have gotten the idea to do this. But the combination of the two is challenging, as I say. When we talk about organizational change management, a quick way to describe it, not the one we always use, but a useful way to describe it, is to look at the change equation. If you want more information on this, it's available on the internet. You can get explanations in a number of places, lots of arguments again as to who invented it and what letters go where, etc. But in essence, it says that if dissatisfaction amongst employees is strong, and you can multiply that by the clear vision for the change that's going to happen, multiply that by the defined first steps that people can see and understand, as in I know where this journey starts, And if the sum total of that is larger than the resistance in the organization, then change will be able to take place. Important in that is these are not plus, this is not addition, this is multiplication. So if the dissatisfaction, vision, or first steps are 0, then the sum total of the work that you're doing is 0, and that will very rarely exceed the resistance. Sometimes, typically, when you start a change program, the resistance is strong and the dissatisfaction, vision, and first steps are non-existent. So really what organizational change management is understanding that people sit behind that and that people will drive the change. Hopefully that makes sense. This, as I say, is not a session where we're talking about OCM, organizational change management, but it is nonetheless something that we want people to understand. Importantly, OCM, organizational change management, is not an exclusive club. It is different in our view from change management as delivered by large consultancies and many of our client companies where they believe they have a change capability. Organizational change management focuses on people and making sure that people can deliver what we're setting out to do. If people can't deliver the change, then the change isn't going to happen. OCM is not an exclusive club, nor is Agile. We want you to think about Agile in a way that allows you to attack it, understand it, give it a try, and not be afraid. There are big questions around Agile that people like to argue about, and to save you some time at dinner parties or when you go to events, let's just cover off a couple of those. Agile actually has quite a long history. Some people will claim it was invented with the Agile Manifesto at the turn of the century in the year 2000, which you can find online, which is useful but very focused on IT and particularly on application development. In fact, you could argue that the origin of Agile goes back to a 1970 paper by a fellow called Dr. William Royce, R-O-I-C-E, who wrote about developing technology and technology programs much the way you would work on an assembly line. So do it in piecemeal bits and keep moving, which some of you who are familiar with it will recognize is not dissimilar to Agile. If you're going to say then it's piecemeal, then you can start tracking Agile back to Elton Mayo and the Hawthorne experiments in Chicago in the 1930s and 40s, run by MIT, which if you're ever looking for a very interesting read that people don't talk about enough, look up the Hawthorne experiments into management and teams. Arguably, Agile's been around for a long time, but it has sort of taken form and become very popular, as I say, ended up on t-shirts more recently. If we then look at what it's attempting to do, one of the many overlaps with change management, which we'll come back to, is Agile is very useful for managing predictability. So if you think about a typical, what we call a waterfall program, I'll try and speak slower, but because I realize I'm speaking a bit fast, but a waterfall program is one in which you plan, you design, you build, you test, and you deliver. And we've all been involved in programs, but you can imagine programs where that might take years and months and sometimes decades if you're building something that's very big and compelling, and then you unleash it on the world and hope for the best. We don't particularly want you to be doing that, and programs generally will change as they go along, which is where change management finds its space as well. So what Agile does is looks at incremental, iterative approaches to change. And you should recognize some of this about Agile if you've had a look at it, which is it's based around small teams. I think the limit, depending on who you speak to, is 10 or 12 per team. The tasks you set up are time-bound, so usually 1 week or 2 weeks. The teams tend to be cross-functional, so you will have IT people in with program people, in with developers and programmers and marketing people, depending on what you've got going on. That's very important, so it's not people just saying the same thing. The team will be self-organizing. There's no hierarchy within the team, and it will be customer-centric. So you will attempt to ensure that the customer is at the center of everything you're trying to do. A few more words, and I'm not going to go into a tremendous amount of detail, but in essence, Agile has its own language. So like rock and roll in my earlier analogy, people are able to talk to each other in a way that they think is different. This is where I think it gets a bit like hippie culture or Comic-Con. You know, it's important to have the language. Have you done your sprints? When are we doing the retro? Does this have the cadence, etc.? All of those are worth looking up, interesting terms, and its language is often a barrier to entry. I think in the case of Agile, language is set up as a way to create some exclusivity and build team. So don't be afraid of the language. A key word in it that you should know, and you've probably heard recently, is a minimum viable product. In essence, in your short time span, in your time-bound piece of work, you're looking to build an MVP as quickly as possible. When I was a boy, most valuable player was the guy who got to come out on the ice rink at the end of the game and skate around again. But MVP is now minimum viable product. When we worked with a client who was not familiar with Agile, we changed it to minimum viable deliverable because they found that useful. I was just looking through a presentation from a branding agency where they use the term minimum lovable product, which I find difficult, to be honest, but there you go. Other language you'll find: avatars, stand-ups, t-shirt sizes, all sorts of things which might frighten you but should not. And probably two of the key terms, Kanban and Scrum. Scrum tends to be another reference for your team and also the process of working that team. Kanban is the board that a lot of Agile projects are built around, which you'll see in beautiful purple and yellow behind the people in the picture here. Again, look into those. Kanban and Scrum are also names of approaches to Agile. So we've seen documented at least 40 different kinds of Agile that people come up with. Our best guess is there's probably over 100. But truth is that Agile is about taking the pieces that are most useful for you and using those in ways that get you to where you want to be. So again, don't be afraid of that aspect of it. Essentially, what the difference between Agile and Waterfall when it comes to program management is Agile is all about responding to a change rather than following a plan. Yeah, so the idea is you do iterations and it's incremental so that you're able to do that. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, what we really want you to urge you to do when it comes to Agile and change management is jump in, get involved, and look at it and try and find ways that you can understand it and work with it. So what does Agile do that's special? A bunch of things. I might just pick out a couple of these, but it's about continuous development. So if you look at these sprints or time-bound windows that you look at of a week or 2 weeks, you will set up something, you'll test it at the end of that period, and then you'll develop it some more. So you pretty much never stop developing, fixing, and amending the process as you go along. The customer is put at the center of the process. So the customer is the person who is reviewing the product at the end of each sprint. A lot of businesses will talk about product owners. So a product is what you're developing, whether it's a deliverable or a piece of code or a document out of a sprint. And the product owner is the representative of the customer. So it's important that whoever it will be using it at the end checks in with it on a regular basis. Focusing on iteration, so as we said, a bunch of different things that bounce around. You need to sort of do it and then check and then do it again. Part of that, as I've said, is regular feedback loops. There are a number of different things in here that are worth looking at a little bit more. The idea of testing, I've mentioned, a process that's sustainable, so each week you start again and you hopefully make it work there. Clear tasking and no bureaucracy. So two of the things that are exciting about Agile is that in order to start an Agile project, you need to take the whole destination and the whole travel and break it up into parts that can be done in a period of 1 or 2 weeks. So then you need to be able to give those to people with a very clear task so that they can work and help each other. Part of your regular stand-up meetings in Agile are about asking for help, so it drives cooperation. And one of the things that makes Agile cultish in its good times is that there is no bureaucracy. Teams manage themselves. So in that context, it's worth looking at it in comparison to OCM, or Organizational Change Management. I should be telling you when I'm changing the slide so you know to get a screen grab at the appropriate time, but hopefully you're being active with that if that's something you want to do. So OCM, looking at the same kinds of setups, we can look at it in slightly different ways. Organizational change management is about preparing people to change. It focuses on the employee or the end person involved in the change. And in that context, it's about managing transitions. So you can then add to that a couple of layers of information underneath, and that is it's about building change capability, which is what OCM should do in an organization, and it's about testing as you go along, creating clear goals, and building networks within a business. So there's some tremendous parallels there as you go along. One or two more slides before we get to our case study, and I ask Ben Tye to join us. So the final piece around the connection between Agile and OCM is that there are some highlights in the areas and the ways in which they work together. They're both aimed at responding to uncertainties. They're both aimed at managing things in a way that haven't been managed before. They both focus on the end user. In the case of Agile, it's the customer or the product owner. In the case of organizational change management, it's the people who are going to implement the change. They're both iterative and easily adjustable. The tools that we have in change we found fairly easy to adjust to Agile. Not everything fits perfectly, but it does allow you to work in that way. And they're both focused on getting people to talk to each other, which is great, and that's a key thing to be able to do. So another note on this is who's doing it and why. Here's just a list of some companies you can find on the internet. Spreadsheet actually that lists those that have identified themselves as doing it one way or the other. We've just picked the ones with blue in their logo, so we've been very scientific about it. There are dozens and dozens of others: Vodafone, ING, American Express, Airbnb, Spotify, lots and lots of companies, a number of our clients. So if you look on our client list, you can be sure that a number of those people use that as well. Hopefully that makes sense. I've not seen much activity in the chat box since a couple of people worrying about sound. So do please drop in notes as we go, and we'll pick up some questions once we get there. Final point around Agile before we go to the case study is just around how you can think Agile and be Agile. And some of you may recognize this if you've seen some of the collateral that comes out of this building, but on the values and behaviors side, we urge you to understand the theory, and on the tools and techniques side, look at the variations and try and figure out what yours is, or go into your business and see how they use Agile. Do it, get out and practice it in your work, join scrums and teams in your offices if you can. Serve the business with it. Tailor your tools to be able to operate in an Agile environment. If you don't find one in your business, go and create one. Get others to trial it if they're not already. And then iterate it, so learn to work in sprints and try MVPs. Break the work down into increments. See if you can look at your project and understand it in these 2-week intervals as we go along. And finally, teach it. They say there's no better way to understand something than to try and tell somebody else how to do it. So we would definitely urge you to go out and try some of those things. You'll find more information on that and on plenty of other things on our website if you go and take a look at that. So now as we head into this case study, I'm going to put the movie back on, put the screen back on, and my colleague Ben and I are going to adjust our chairs so that we're both on screen. There you go. Two incredibly handsome men. Welcome, Ben. Thanks for coming.
Hi, Wayne. You're looking much younger these days.
Yeah, no, it says Wayne Knox, but I'm just impersonating him. But thanks very much for coming. So we've got good fortune to have you here. You've been working on a major international client that is using Agile processes, but you're also a veteran of other Agile clients as well. So we won't necessarily ask you to identify each one, but I know you've got some learnings and some real practical examples of that. So can I put up some headlines and maybe you can tell us what they make you think of, or what the lessons are that come out of this?
Yeah, thanks, David. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Ben Tye. I'm a principal here at Agile House, so thanks very much for hosting us and giving us your time and attention this afternoon. So right now, in fact, literally just stepped off a plane this morning, Agile and how we are leading the organisational change program associated with a big global merger. So we've got two large companies in the energy sector, both about approximately 30,000 employees, coming together to create an entirely new company, and we're privileged and honoured to be leading the organisational change workstream as part of the integration programme. And we've been running that workstream using Agile, it's been a fantastic experience, and we've learned a lot, and the clients learned a lot too. And so I think in terms of some of the headlines, in terms of the value that we've gained and the client has gained out of using Agile, I think the concept of being able to iterate quickly. If we are running fortnightly sprints, that gives us a really good opportunity to adjust our scope, to adjust our schedule, and to adjust our priorities every 2 weeks with the client. And those 2 week sprints culminate in what we call a retrospective, and that's where we take a really good hard look at over the last 2 weeks what's worked well, what has not worked, what we've learned, which I think is a very powerful question, and what still puzzles us. And so those iterations become very much a process of discovery as well as delivery.
Let me add some stuff here. Sorry, Ben. Kanban and ceremonies, make it very public.
Yeah, so I think you touched on this earlier, but one of the core principles that we use in managing change in an agile way is something called Kanban. That's been adopted from the lean arena, and it's a way of effectively controlling work in progress. So it has its roots way back in the kind of 1970s lean manufacturing processes. So I wore that hat many years ago as an engineer. So it's really great to see it now being applied in a change management context. So our Kanban board is basically it's way more than a to-do list. It's a visual representation that embodies what's important to the team, what we're really working on right now. The power of the sticky and the Sharpie in terms of standing up every day, writing down what you are going to do in the next 24 or 48 hours. Physically, the action of writing it and putting it on the Kanban board and having that visible to the rest of the team is a very powerful motivator. It's quite hard to describe on screen, but a lot of the agile approaches, the value is in the behavior that they drive rather than the kind of products and the processes themselves. So everything is visible. It increases visibility and accountability, and there's a real sense of progress. So rather than moving, from left to right across some kind of vague Gantt chart, you're actually seeing the product backlog in the left-hand side progress through the to-do and appear as completed. And so there's a tremendous amount of satisfaction to look at the end of every 2 week sprint and see the amount of outcomes and outputs that have been achieved. Fantastic.
Tell us a bit about how that helps to sort of build teams.
Everybody's involved in planning. Everybody's involved in figuring out what the product backlog, and the product backlog, if we've not touched on that so far, is essentially the tasks and activities and products and outputs that we want to achieve in each sprint. And we talk about, I think you've mentioned minimum viable products. Mm-hmm. We find it helpful to talk about minimum viable change. So, for example, I can give a very real example. We have been working on a process to activate the new leaders of this particular new company, mm-hmm. and everybody's got lots of ideas about what form that might take. And so we've used the concept of the minimum viable change in order to scope out what are the behaviours that are required, what are we expecting them to do, and work towards that over the last 2 weeks. So we've got a retrospective on that on Monday.
Fantastic, brilliant. Okay, let's try another one on you. So this is more of a sort of FT headline. It goes on for a little while, but real-time collaboration drives tasks to get things done faster and easier. So tell us a bit about what it's like to have people in one place at one time and how that works.
Yeah, so there's upsides and downsides to this. So I'm going to touch on some of the positives, but also some of the challenges that we've had. As we said, we've got a team room where the project team are located. The Kanban board is on the wall. We have our daily huddles every morning. And so that, the work itself is incredibly collaborative because you're co-located. However, this program that we're working on for this particular client, it's global. We've got people in lots of different countries, and so we've scratched our head in terms of how do we engender that sort of environment. So we've come up with two solutions. One is we have duplicate Kanban boards in 2 locations, and then we use the webcam. Yeah. So for our huddle every day, we have it at a time that's appropriate for the time zones that we're operating in, and we do the huddle using the Kanban. And because the Kanban boards are replicated in both places, we've got some really good visibility there, and we've been able to get almost the exact same level of kind of interaction that we have in the team room across two different continents.
Okay. So they always say that one of the problems with remote working or working from home is that you cannot, form a solid team at a distance.
Right.
But I think what you're saying is you can get pretty close.
Yeah, I think so. So the use of webcam technologies and Skype and WebEx, and having the ability to just flick on the screen and talk to somebody over a camera is incredibly powerful. But face-to-face is important. So certainly when we think about the longer releases that we've been working on, and when we say release, it's not software, it's a release of business capability. We have those longer, the release planning cycles together in the same place, sitting down face-to-face. Because the longer planning cycles and the longer objective setting cycles are really important to do together.
Right. Okay. So Ben's not seen this, but we couldn't go away without putting a tabloid up. So tell us a little bit about how Agile and organizational change management are and can come together in your experience. Because as I was saying earlier in this webinar, Agile comes out of technology development. It's not necessarily a change thing, but you're working on a project that's got nothing to do with technology. Yeah. So tell us a bit about that.
So I think there's a few things that are different to your classic long waterfall project and program management, and yet the change management tools that we use have remained largely the same. I think there's less time spent thinking about trying to perfect the future or trying to develop the perfect solution, because by iterating every 2 weeks and going through a series of releases and sprints, you're no longer perhaps second guessing as much as you are in terms of what the requirements might be. Yeah. So if I think about a real example, training, learning and development, rather than sitting down and gathering requirements and trying to understand what the full training program is, needs to be around the introduction of a particular change. You can start doing it, start testing it, and let the requirements emerge as a result of engaging with the client, rather than trying to think about what it is that they need. Just test.
Yeah. So the facts rather than conjecture.
Yeah,
you actually know what's happening because people can respond to a real thing. Yeah. Got it. Okay, brilliant. Let me just talk to you a little bit, or ask you a little bit about some of the bits you've learned that can be tricky. Tell us a bit about the problems with the hard stuff.
Yeah. So in those of you who have either worked in an Agile environment or perhaps familiar with some of the concepts that we're talking about, is the daily huddle is where you as an individual choose which tasks and activities you're going to work on. And human nature, it's simpler to pick the easier tasks. And so that's why the setting of the goals in each sprint is so important, to have really clearly articulated goals for the next 2 weeks, such that because they then inform your decision making on a daily basis in terms of what do I need to accomplish in the next 24, 48 hours. But it was a lesson we learned last year on a particular program, in that we realized we had been choosing simpler, less difficult tasks off the to-do list, and not tackling the hard stuff. And I think that's where the role of the project manager or the the Scrum Master
Right.
becomes really important. There's a certain, getting the balance right between self-selection and actually being, given tasks.
Yeah.
I think is really important.
Yeah, yeah. Brilliant. Okay. Questions are coming in and we will get to them. So we really appreciate you asking them. I'm just making note of them if you're wondering whether I'm doing a crossword puzzle at the same time. Let's have a look at the next one, Ben, that you've raised, which is around not having a short-term view. It's perhaps allied to what you said, but one of my experiences with Agile is that I always look at the Kanban board and I think, if I didn't want to do those things, can I not just sneak in before everybody gets here and take a few down? But that's harder to do, isn't it? That's not. I know I'm not with the program necessarily.
Yeah, so I think with all the benefits that come from having a fortnightly sprint with a set of goals associated with that sprint, a fortnight isn't a long time.
Yeah.
And some of the things that we do in change and other things are pretty complicated. And take quite a long time to bring to fruition. So that's where the idea of the release plan becomes really important, because if I take this particular program we're working on at the moment, that's an 18-month program.
Yeah.
And so what we've done is divided 2017 up into quarters.
Right.
And a quarter represents a release of business capability. And so we've been pretty clear about what needs to be in place in terms of leadership capability, people's capability, ways of working. And so we've defined a very tight scope for the release. And then we can then make sure that each of our 2-week sprints, the goals that are articulated, are directly tied to the objectives of the quarterly release.
Yeah. So there's a diligence there that is perhaps not. You don't see it in the original surprise of we're moving Post-its around and we're all in our flip-flops doing this stuff.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that release planning is really important to make sure you are meeting those longer-term goals.
Got it. Okay, brilliant. Let's look at the last one here, Ben, that you put down, which is getting people involved from further away. We talked a bit about this, and this is just about trying to connect up those teams. Say, though, for example, you tried to put together a Scrum team where you had someone in Melbourne and someone in Houston and someone in North Africa or something. You physically can't do that, can you? So is that a restriction on Agile, or is the answer that you need to split up your activities and put some in Asia, some here, some there, and then have them come together once a fortnight, or how do you do that? Because it is a genuine challenge.
Yeah. So in the situation that you described, that's probably the worst case scenario.
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
So the solution there is to make sure that you have your daily huddle at between 1 p.m. and 1:30 UK time. Because
make everybody else get up.
That will mean that you've caught the team in Australia towards the end of their working day, and the folk in the US as they're getting up in the morning. But as I said before, just making sure that you've got some video. This, I don't think this stuff works remotely without video conferencing technology of some description. Looking in the whites of people's eyes and having that kind of ability to engage. I think it's really hard to do over the telephone.
But one of the nice things about Agile, though, is we've used this before in our business, haven't we, for long meetings. And it's quite hard for long ones because the person on the other end invariably gets a bowl of cereal or you start getting distracted, which is why I turned the camera off for part of this session. However, because Agile is based on short, sharp meetings, isn't it? Stand-ups that are 15 minutes or less, that kind of thing. You can sustain people's attention. Is that right? Yeah,
that's correct. Yeah.
And I remember at a presentation at a conference we were at recently, Deutsche Bank was talking, and they said in their room they had a video camera like this set up in the corner, and it was on at all times.
Yeah.
And so people could just walk up to it and say, hello. Can I have a question? Can I speak to Joe? And they go up to the camera. Right. So there are methods out there, but it is a real challenge. Okay, fair enough. Brilliant. Ben, stay with me if that's all right, because I'm just going to wrap up and then we'll maybe take some questions and see how we go. Yeah. So the final point, and jump in as you wish here, but a couple simple ways ideas for you to take away. Agile has jumped the fence. It's no longer an IT or technology development methodology. It's being used in all sorts of things, as it should be. It's not something you can avoid. You can't hope that it'll go away before you have to learn it. And nor should you. It's a dynamic and exciting way to run projects, and it brings great opportunities to businesses. Second of all, Agile supports change, but change supports Agile as well. So the connection, as Ben has said, between the two is fairly clear. There are going to be challenges in making them work together, but we'd encourage you to give it a try as much as you can. And the final point is just get out there and do it. You know, we're keen for you to give it a try and to see how it works for you. And as I say, we've got tools on our website if you want us to get involved with your business or help your business to do some stuff. More than happy to do that as well. But do check in. We'll give you our mobile numbers, and the rest are on the next page. So let's go to that. Actually, our mobile numbers aren't. That's probably safest. But our email addresses are. Miranda was helping me today, and Wayne was originally going to work on this as well. So we're a number of us in this team. Anybody you call here can give you a hand with it. So do put in some questions. I've picked up a couple, and maybe, Ben, we can have a crack at some of these and see how we do. Do let us know if there's a specific topic where we'll stay on for probably another 10, 15 minutes or so and keep answering questions. But if you can put some in, then we'll answer them directly for you from that chat application. So Madeline asked a while ago, tell us about metrics. How can you tell that this has been more successful than something else? So what's the argument on that? And I've got a vague sense, but do you want to take a crack or?
Are we talking? So I think let me try and answer the question in two ways. Yeah. I think so. Why is Agile better than a traditional linear waterfall approach? I think there's lots of evidence out there that's available in terms of research that, and it's not suitable for everything. So where there is uncertainty, where there is risk, where there is a lack of clarity and specificity around outcomes, yeah, this is by far and away the best approach to use, because there's an element of discovery and learning associated with each sprint. Where you shouldn't really use Agile is where there's a lot of capital expenditure involved. Okay. So you wouldn't build an airport or a hospital using Agile, because you're committing to millions of pounds of concrete and steel, and there isn't really much room to experiment. Yeah. And also where health and safety and some really kind of strict regulatory requirements involved, I would encourage people to adopt a more. You wouldn't use it to organise heart surgery. No. Okay. But then in terms of metrics, there are a whole bunch of metrics. So we use something called burn rate, which is effectively the number of tasks and activities that we've got through each sprint. So we classify our to-do list in terms of t-shirt sizing. So instead of thinking, how long is it going to take to accomplish this task, we just have small, medium, large, and extra large tasks, and each of those has a weighting. So at the end of each sprint, we can calculate how productive we've been over the sprint by calculating how many tasks we've achieved and their relative t-shirt size. Yeah. And I think the question might have been, can you point me in the direction of a document or some research that shows that Agile is more cost effective or brings better results than traditional project planning? And I would say if you're going to look for that, you may be able to find something. The problem with research these days is that almost every argument can be refuted one way or the other. And one of the challenges we have with that is that if a company undertook the same project in two ways and the Agile delivered better, there may be questions around management or prioritization. So it's quite hard to come up with that solid economic argument that says this is black and that is white. So it is a bit of a challenge, but Agile versus waterfall is not alone in that. There are just so many things that we get asked by our clients. Can you prove that I will save this much money by doing work with you? And truthfully, you can't necessarily. There are too many variables involved. Right. Second question we had was, how does it relate to lean? And I think you've touched on that, but do you want to touch on it any more? I think your point was there are shared tools between Agile and lean. Yeah. I would say lean is about process improvements, isn't it? And it's very focused on that. Yeah. So how does it relate to lean? So first of all, philosophically, no waste. So the whole idea behind lean thinking, lean manufacturing, lean development is that you're working on the right things and you're doing the right things. So you're trying to minimize waste. And the same holds true for Agile. So that's where the two touch. So lean thinking is a way of kind of minimizing unnecessary work.
Yeah.
And Agile is a way of focusing on the right things. So you'll see a lot of intermingling between lean thinking and Agile approaches to work execution. And in fact, the Kanban that we talked about earlier, that's a product of the lean environment. And then on a more broader perspective, we start to get into things like the lean startup concept, and
which is a bit of a misnomer, is it? In fairness, in that, so for those of you not familiar, The Lean Startup is a book by Eric Ries,
correct, yeah.
Which has been very important for a company called General Electric in the way in which they look at the world. But it's not actually a book about lean process, about the lean at all, is it?
No, it's a way of thinking about your business.
It's a book about Agile more than it is about lean. Is that not right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so do tell us about that book.
Yeah, so if you haven't read it, it's worth reading. So Eric was a developer in Silicon Valley, and was one of the founders of PayPal, and had a very successful career. And he realized that the way that they run their businesses out in the valley are ultimately based on lean and agile thinking, because they're building software companies. So the way that they work like this on a day-to-day basis. But what's been interesting to see is a company like GE adopt those lean startup principles and apply them at the enterprise level. So using lean thinking, which they've actually trademarked as what they call FastWorks, which is a combination of agile project management, lean approaches, and they initially applied it in their product development. So MRI scanners, aeroplane engines, cut down the time to market cycles with incredible results through adopting some of these approaches. And then they've now been using FastWorks for things like introducing compensation and benefit schemes. Wow. And that's a really interesting development to see a corporation of that size adopting the agile and lean principles as a way of running the business.
Even the trend you mentioned in terms of some of the stuff they build cannot fall out of the air or struggle. So it must be even more of a challenge for that business. Let's just go through a couple more. I think I promised you 45 minutes, which is up, but we'll stick with it for a few more minutes if you would like. We'll answer that question in a sec, Madeline. Just get through two more. Mindset. So one of the questions was, I can understand the tools are there, et cetera, but to what extent is mindset important in this?
It's hard to understate how important it is, and it's really hard to describe. So I'm actually going to struggle to answer the question.
Well, can I try one?
Yeah.
So Ben will recognize this because we've talked about it a lot around here, but we're quite big fans at Able and How of something that is called growth mindset. So, and growth mindset is set up in comparison to fixed mindset. There's a book called Mindset written about it, which is not a brilliant read, but it's got the information in it. It's just not tremendously compelling, but the way it's written. Growth mindset essentially says, I can learn new things. I can do things differently. I've not learned to do something yet. And fixed mindset says, I know how to do this. I will be paid for doing it again. I want to do what I've done before. Is that a fair analysis?
Yeah.
And I think to answer the question, Amble, who asked the question, the growth mindset is the kind of thing you want to bring into lean, into agile, because you will be asked to do things you haven't done before. People will say to you, can you help with this? And you'll say, well, I've not done it before, but I tell you what, I'm an engineer, or I can help you with it, etc. So that kind of thing I think is really important. Is that fair?
Yeah, and how this manifests. So this is we could have another webinar on this topic, and I think maybe we want to at some point. But things like the role of the manager as coach. The big difference for me, I think, having been a project and program manager in the past, actually running these change projects and programs in an agile way, the way I work is much more of a coach than a manager. So that's one big learning for me. Secondly, it's that whole fail fast thing. And so, first of all, it's okay to not have all the answers. Yeah. It encourages an exploratory approach. It encourages collaboration, and being comfortable with failing. I think is another really important aspect.
Yeah.
And then I talked previously about just behaviourally. It's so different doing a daily huddle where everybody is standing, so nobody's sat. Everybody's taking their turn to physically point at the Kanban board to say what they are working on. Taking personal ownership for writing things down and putting them on a sticky. It sounds really trite and silly.
Well, until you do it.
But actually,
Yeah,
the act of writing something down, today I will do this, write it down, put it on the Kanban board, it's so much more powerful than kind of a traditional kind of project meeting where you go through the risks log, you go through the actions log, you go through the plan. It's very, very different, and I think it can only be experienced in order to try and sort of appreciate the mindset. And then finally, just a tremendous sense of accomplishment. It sounds rather silly, but getting to the end of each day and seeing that you've moved 15 items from the left hand side to the right hand side.
And it encourages you to go in and move some more, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
So I recognize we're getting to the end of our time. There's one question which I'm going to try and answer in 10 words or less, and Ben can maybe do the same, which is change programs have traditionally not delivered the value that they had promised. We know that. There's 40 years of it. How is this different? How will it make a difference? So my answer in 10 words or less is that where we have been involved in change programs using what we call organizational change management, which is focusing on people and on people outcomes and readiness for change, those programs have not failed. And if you look at the projects we've been involved with over the last 10 years, we can point to some tremendous successes. I would argue that change management has failed to deliver what was promised by the change because it's not been done properly.
Amen.
Amen. Brilliant. Thanks to those of you who stuck around. You got right to the prayer session at the end, so that's great. Remember, Agile is like rock and roll. Really appreciate you guys sticking in and asking questions and stuff. Some are coming up now. We'll take those up offline. We're going to end this recording, pause the webinar for now. Really appreciate all of those who have listened in, and good luck to those of you out there off to do stuff. And to those listening later off the website, get